The dust had barely settled on Thomas Calloway's grave when his widow told the first man who came calling that her heart was buried 6 feet under alongside him, and she had no intention of digging it back up. Quinn Sutherland heard those words on a scorching June afternoon in 1877, standing on the weathered porch of the Calloway Ranch just outside Carson City, Nevada. He had his hat in his hands and sweat beading on his forehead, not entirely from the desert heat. The woman before him was perhaps 24 years old, with auburn hair pulled back in a practical bun and eyes the color of storm clouds. Her black morning dress hung loose on her frame, suggesting she had not been eating properly since her husband's death 3 months prior. "Mrs. Calloway," Quinn said carefully, his voice carrying the slow drawl of someone who had spent his 26 years mostly on horseback. "I am not here to court you. I am here because your ranch is failing, and my father sent me to make you an offer." Marianne Calloway crossed her arms over her chest, leaning against the doorframe with an exhaustion that seemed to go bone deep. "Your father wants to buy my land. I have heard this offer from 3 other men this month alone. The answer is no. That is not the offer." Quinn replaced his hat, squinting against the bright Nevada sun. "My father owns the Sutherland Ranch 5 miles west of here. He needs someone to manage his cattle operation, and he knows you ran this place alongside your husband. He wants to hire you." For the first time, something flickered in those gray eyes. Surprise, perhaps, or suspicion. "Hire me to manage livestock. You would live here still, work your own land when you can, but 3 days a week you would come to our ranch and oversee the cattle operation. The pay is $40 a month, plus a share of the profits when we sell the herd in autumn." Marianne was quiet for a long moment, studying him with an intensity that made Quinn feel like he was being measured and found lacking. Finally, she said, "Why would your father hire a woman for such work?" "Because Thomas Calloway's cattle were the healthiest in the territory before he died, and everyone knows it was your doing. You have an eye for livestock that most men spend a lifetime trying to develop." Quinn shifted his weight, uncomfortable with the directness of her gaze. "And because my father believes in paying people for their skills, regardless of whether they wear trousers or skirts. I cannot leave my land unattended 3 full days. We would send 2 of our ranch hands to maintain your property on those days. Repairs, feeding, whatever needs doing." She studied him for another long moment, then said, "I will consider it. Come back in 2 days for my answer." Quinn nodded, started to turn away, then paused. "Mrs. Calloway, I am sorry about Thomas. He was a good man." "He was the only good thing in my life," she said quietly. "And now he is gone." Quinn wanted to say something comforting, something that would ease the raw grief in her voice, but he knew from experience that words rarely helped. So he simply tipped his hat and walked back to his horse, a sturdy bay gelding named Copper, who stamped impatiently in the heat. As he rode away from the Calloway Ranch, Quinn thought about what he had heard in town about Marianne and Thomas. They had married 4 years ago. A love match that had scandalized some of the more traditional families, because Marianne had been working as a cook in a hotel rather than being a proper lady of means. Thomas had not cared. He had courted her with a single-minded determination that became legendary. And when they married, he had built her the finest ranch house he could afford with his own 2 hands. Then a rattlesnake had bitten him while he was checking fence lines, and he had died before anyone could get him to a doctor. Marianne had found him herself, had tried to save him, had held him as he died. The story went that she had not cried at the funeral, had simply stood beside the grave with her face like carved marble, and had not shed a single tear since. Quinn knew something about grief that turned cold and hard inside you. His mother had died when he was 12, taken by fever, and his father had withdrawn into himself for nearly 2 years afterward. The Sutherland ranch had nearly failed during that time, and it was only Quinn's stubborn refusal to let his mother's memory die along with the land she had loved that kept things running. 2 days later, Quinn returned to the Calloway ranch at midday. Marianne answered the door in a simple brown work dress, her hair still pulled back severely, but her eyes were clearer than they had been during his first visit. "I accept your father's offer," she said without preamble, "on the condition that I choose which days I work and which ranch hands you send to maintain my property." "Fair enough," Quinn agreed. "Can you start next week?" "I can start tomorrow." Quinn blinked in surprise. "That is quick." "Sitting idle gives me too much time to think," Marianne said flatly. "I prefer to stay busy." And busy she certainly stayed. When Marianne Calloway arrived at the Sutherland ranch the next morning, she spent the first 2 hours walking through the cattle pens with a critical eye, examining each animal with a thoroughness that impressed even the most skeptical ranch hands. By noon, she had identified 6 head with early signs of disease and had them quarantined before the illness could spread to the rest of the herd. Quinn's father, Robert Sutherland, was a barrel-chested man in his early 50s with graying hair and sharp blue eyes. He watched Marianne work with evident satisfaction, then clapped Quinn on the shoulder. "You did well bringing her here, son. That woman knows cattle better than men twice her age." "She knows grief too," Quinn said quietly, watching as Marianne instructed 2 ranch hands on proper quarantine procedures. Robert's expression sobered. "Aye, that she does. Your mother would have liked her, I think. They have the same steel spine." Over the following weeks, Quinn found himself working alongside Marianne more often than not. His father had put him in charge of the overall ranch operations, which meant he coordinated with Marianne on the cattle management. They fell into an easy working rhythm. Though Marianne remained distant and professional at all times, she never smiled. She never made casual conversation. She arrived at dawn on her work days, completed her tasks with ruthless efficiency, and left at dusk. The few times Quinn tried to engage her in topics beyond ranch business, she deflected with practiced ease. "The summer heat is fierce this year," Quinn remarked one afternoon in mid-July as they checked water levels in the cattle troughs. "It is within normal range for Nevada in July," Marianne replied without looking at him. "I heard there is a dance in town next Saturday. Most of the territory will be there. I am in mourning. Attending dances would be inappropriate." "Of course. I did not mean to suggest otherwise. I only thought you might enjoy seeing people, maybe talking with some of the other ranch women." Marianne finally looked at him, her gray eyes cool and distant. "Mr. Sutherland, I appreciate the employment your father has provided, but I am not interested in socializing. My husband has been dead for 4 months. My heart was buried with him, and I have no interest in pretending otherwise to make other people more comfortable with my grief." Quinn held up his hands in a gesture of peace. "I understand, Mrs. Calloway. I apologize for overstepping." She nodded curtly and returned to her work, and Quinn felt like he had been firmly put in his place. But something about the encounter stayed with him, gnawing at the back of his mind. It was not that she was grieving. It was that her grief had such finality to it, as though she had decided that the rest of her life would be nothing more than going through the motions. That night, Quinn mentioned the conversation to his father over dinner. Robert was quiet for a moment, chewing thoughtfully on a piece of beef, then said, "When your mother died, I thought my life was over. I thought the best parts of me died with her, and what remained was just obligation and routine." "I remember," Quinn said softly. "You saved me, you know. You and this ranch. You forced me to keep living when all I wanted to do was give up." Robert met his son's eyes across the table. Some people, when they lose the person they love most, they build walls so high that nothing can reach them anymore. They convince themselves that loving once and losing is better than risking that pain again. Is that what you think Mrs. Calloway is doing? I think she is scared, Robert said simply. And I think she is very young to have decided that her life is over. The next time Marianne came to the ranch, Quinn made a point of simply working alongside her without trying to make conversation. He noticed small things about her that he had missed before. The way she touched each cow gently before examining it, murmuring soft words that seemed to calm even the most skittish animals. The way she tilted her face up to the sun during their brief break, eyes closed, as though storing up warmth against some internal cold. The way her hands trembled slightly when she thought no one was watching. After 3 hours of work, Quinn broke the silence. I lost my mother when I was 12. Marianne glanced at him, surprise flickering across her face, but said nothing. I thought my father would never recover, Quinn continued, his voice measured and calm. For 2 years he was a shell of himself. The ranch nearly failed. I was angry at him for that, for giving up, but I also understood it. When you love someone that much, losing them breaks something fundamental inside you. Marianne's hand stilled on the gate latch she had been fixing. Why are you telling me this? Because eventually, my father did recover. Not completely, perhaps. I do not think you ever completely heal from losing the person you built your life around. But he learned to live again, to find meaning in other things, to let himself care about the world again. Quinn met her eyes steadily. I am not suggesting you should stop grieving, Mrs. Calloway. I am just saying that Thomas would not have wanted you to bury yourself alongside him. For a long moment, Marianne just stared at him, and Quinn saw a flash of something raw and painful in her expression. Then she looked away, her jaw tight. You did not know my husband, Mr. Sutherland. You do not know what he would have wanted. You are right, Quinn acknowledged. But I know what any man who loved his wife would want. He would want her to live, not just exist. Marianne turned back to the gate latch, her movements sharp and angry now. My heart is dead, Mr. Sutherland. It died with Thomas. You cannot expect flowers to bloom in a graveyard. Quinn felt something shift inside him at those words, a determination settling into his bones. Without really thinking about what he was saying, he replied, Then I will wait until it grows again. Marianne froze, her hands gripping the gate so tightly her knuckles went white. She turned to face him slowly, disbelief written across her features. What did you say? I said I will wait, Quinn repeated, and he was surprised by the certainty in his own voice. However long it takes, however many seasons have to pass, I will wait until your heart grows again. That is the most foolish thing I have ever heard, Marianne said, but her voice lacked conviction. You cannot wait for something that is never going to happen. Maybe, Quinn agreed. But I have always been stubborn, and I have nowhere else I need to be. Marianne shook her head, something like frustration crossing her face. I am not a project for you to fix, Mr. Sutherland. I am not some wounded bird you can nurse back to health and then pat yourself on the back for being a good person. I know that. Quinn took a step closer, but maintained a respectful distance. I am not trying to fix you, Mrs. Calloway. I am just saying that when you are ready, if you are ever ready, I will be here. No pressure, no expectations, just patience. Why? The word came out almost as a whisper, and for the first time since Quinn had met her, Marianne Calloway looked vulnerable rather than just exhausted. You do not know me. Why would you wait for someone you do not even know? Quinn considered the question carefully. It was true, he did not know her well. They had worked together for barely a month, and most of their interactions had been purely professional. But there was something about her, Something in the fierce way she protected herself from further pain, the stubborn way she kept working even when grief clearly weighed on her like a physical burden that called to something deep inside him. "I see you," he said finally. "Not the grief, not the walls you have built up. I see the woman who gentles nervous cattle with a soft word, who works until her hands bleed to keep her husband's ranch alive, who has more strength in her little finger than most men have in their whole body. I see someone worth knowing, worth waiting for." Marianne's eyes were bright with unshed tears, but she blinked them away fiercely. "You are going to be waiting a very long time, Mr. Sutherland. Then it is good I am a patient man." Quinn allowed himself a small smile. "And perhaps you could call me Quinn. We have been working together long enough that Mr. Sutherland seems excessive." "Professional boundaries exist for a reason," Marianne said, but there was less bite to her words than usual. "True enough." Quinn tipped his hat to her. "I need to check on the north pasture. Will you be all right finishing the gate repairs on your own?" "I have been doing ranch work since before you knew which end of a cow to feed," Marianne said dryly, and Quinn was startled to hear the faintest hint of humor in her voice. As he walked toward the north pasture, Quinn felt oddly lighthearted despite the serious nature of their conversation. He had not planned to make such a declaration, had not even fully realized his own feelings until the words were coming out of his mouth. But now that he had said it, he knew it was true. He would wait for Marianne Calloway, however long it took, because something told him she was worth waiting for. The weeks following that conversation brought subtle changes to their working relationship. Marianne remained professional and distant, but occasionally Quinn would catch her watching him with a thoughtful expression. She still did not smile, still did not engage in casual conversation, but the sharp edge of her dismissiveness had dulled slightly. In mid-August, a violent thunderstorm rolled through the territory, the kind of fierce summer storm that turned the desert into a temporary sea. Quinn was riding hard for the Calloway Ranch before he even fully thought through what he was doing. Marianne lived alone out there, and while she was certainly capable, some storms were too big for one person to handle. He arrived to find her in the barn, struggling to calm 3 terrified horses while rain pounded on the roof and thunder shook the walls. Without a word, Quinn dismounted and waded through the mud to help her. Together they managed to settle the horses, then spent the next 2 hours reinforcing the barn doors and checking for leaks. When the worst of the storm had passed, they stood in the barn doorway, both soaked to the skin, watching the rain slow to a steady drizzle. Marianne's hair had come loose from its bun and hung in wet tangles around her face. She looked exhausted but somehow more alive than Quinn had ever seen her. "You did not have to come," she said quietly, not looking at him. "I know," Quinn replied, "but you came anyway." "I did." Marianne was silent for a long moment, then said, "Thomas used to do that. Ride through storms to make sure I was safe, even when we were just courting and I lived in town. I would tell him he was being foolish, that I was perfectly capable of taking care of myself, and he would just smile and say that love made a man foolish." It was the first time she had voluntarily mentioned her husband to Quinn, and he recognized it for the gift it was. "He sounds like he was a good man, the best I ever knew." Marianne finally turned to look at Quinn, and he saw something in her expression that had not been there before. Not warmth exactly, but an acknowledgement of his presence that went beyond mere professional courtesy. Until perhaps now. Quinn's heart skipped a beat, but he kept his voice calm. "I am just being a decent neighbor." "No," Marianne said firmly. "You are being more than that, and we both know it." She wrapped her arms around herself, though whether from cold or self-protection, Quinn could not tell. "I do not know if I can ever give you what you are waiting for. I do not know if my heart can grow again. The thought of loving someone and losing them again terrifies me more than anything in this world." "I understand," Quinn said simply. Do you really?" Marianne's voice was sharp with sudden emotion. "Thomas died in my arms. I watched the light leave his eyes. I felt his last breath against my skin. I would rather live the rest of my life feeling nothing than ever experience that kind of pain again." "Then I will wait until you are ready to be brave again," Quinn said steadily. "Love is terrifying, I will not deny that. The possibility of loss is always there, lurking like a shadow. But the alternative is this: walking through life like a ghost, never letting yourself feel anything real. And that is not living, Mrs. Calloway. That is just a slower kind of dying." Marianne flinched as though he had struck her, but she did not look away. "You do not understand what you are asking of me." "I am not asking anything," Quinn reminded her gently. "I am just waiting. There is a difference." The rain had nearly stopped now, and the late afternoon sun was breaking through the clouds, casting everything in a strange golden light. Marianne looked out at her land, at the ranch Thomas had built for her, and Quinn saw her shoulders tremble. "I come out here sometimes at night," she said quietly, "and I talk to him. I tell him about my day, about the cattle, about how the garden is doing, and I wait for him to answer, even though I know he never will." She pressed a hand to her chest. "My heart does not feel buried, it feels shattered." "How do you wait for something to grow when it has been broken into 1,000 pieces?" Quinn moved closer slowly, giving her time to step away if she wanted. She did not. "One piece at a time," he said. "One day at a time. You do not have to heal all at once. You do not have to stop grieving or forget Thomas, or pretend that losing him did not break you. You just have to let yourself believe that maybe, someday, you could feel something good again." Marianne looked up at him, and tears were finally spilling down her cheeks, mixing with the rain still dripping from her hair. "I am so tired," she whispered. "I am so tired of hurting." "I know," Quinn said, and without thinking he reached out and gently brushed a tear from her cheek. She did not pull away, and that small allowance felt like a victory. "You do not have to be strong all the time. You do not have to carry this alone." For a moment, he thought she might collapse into his arms, might finally let herself break down completely. But she straightened her shoulders, wiped roughly at her tears, and stepped back. "I should get changed into dry clothes. Thank you for your help with the storm." It was a clear dismissal, and Quinn accepted it with a nod. "I will check on you tomorrow if that is acceptable." "You do not need to do that." "I know," Quinn said again, "but I will anyway." As he rode back to his own ranch through the wet, clean-smelling air, Quinn thought about what it meant to wait for someone. It was not passive, he was beginning to realize. It was not simply standing still and hoping time would fix everything. It was showing up, day after day, proving through actions rather than words that he meant what he said. It was being present without being pushy, offering support without demanding anything in return. It was, in many ways, the hardest thing he had ever done. September brought cooler temperatures and the busy work of preparing for the autumn cattle drive. The Sutherland ranch would be driving their herd to the railhead in Reno, a journey of several days, and they needed every experienced hand they could get. Robert Sutherland asked Marianne if she would be willing to come along as their livestock specialist, and after some consideration, she agreed. The cattle drive began on a crisp morning in late September, with the Sutherland herd numbering just over 300 head. Quinn served as trail boss, which meant he rode at the front of the herd, scouting the path and making decisions about where to stop for the night. Marianne rode drag, the least desirable position at the back of the herd where the dust was thickest, but she had insisted on it because it gave her the best view of any animals that might be struggling. For the first 2 days, the drive went smoothly. The weather held clear and cool. The cattle moved well, and they made good time. Quinn found himself riding back to check on Marianne more often than was strictly necessary, always under the guise of getting her assessment of the herd's condition. On the third evening, they made camp near a small creek, and Quinn found Marianne sitting apart from the other ranch hands, staring into the flames of her small cooking fire. He approached slowly, clearing his throat so as not to startle her. "Mind if I sit?" he asked. Marianne glanced up at him, then shrugged. "It is your camp." Quinn settled onto the ground a respectful distance away, stretching out his legs with a groan. 3 days in the saddle had reminded him that he was not as young as he used to be. "How are the cattle looking from your position?" "The herd is in good condition," Marianne reported professionally. "2 of the younger steers are showing signs of fatigue, but nothing concerning yet. If we maintain our current pace, they should make it to Reno without issue." "Good." Quinn accepted the cup of coffee Marianne poured for him, savoring the bitter warmth. "And how are you holding up?" "I am fine." "That is not what I asked." Marianne shot him a look that might have been irritation or might have been reluctant amusement. He could not quite tell in the firelight. "I am tired, dusty, and ready to sleep for about 12 hours straight. Is that the answer you were looking for?" "It is more honest, at least." Quinn smiled slightly. "You do not have to pretend with me, you know. You do not have to be strong every moment of every day." "Old habits," Marianne said, and her voice was softer now. She stared into the fire for a long moment, then added, "Thomas and I did a cattle drive together our first year of marriage. It was only 50 head, nothing like this, but I had never been on a drive before. I was terrified I would mess something up, that the other ranch hands would not respect me because I was a woman." "What happened?" "Thomas told me the same thing you just did, that I did not have to pretend to be invincible, that admitting when I was scared or tired or unsure did not make me weak." A ghost of a smile touched Marianne's lips. He was right, of course. Once I stopped trying to prove myself every second, the work got easier. The other hands respected me more for being honest than they ever would have for being perfect. Quinn felt a pang in his chest at the wistfulness in her voice, but also a strange gratitude toward the man he had never met. Thomas had clearly loved Marianne deeply, had seen her for who she was, and encouraged her to be herself. That was the kind of love Quinn wanted to offer her if she would ever let him. "He taught you well," Quinn said quietly. "He did." Marianne wrapped her hands around her coffee cup, and Quinn noticed the calluses on her palms, the rough redness of hands that worked hard every day. "I think about him less now than I did a few months ago. Sometimes a whole hour will pass and I will realize I have not thought about him once, and then I feel guilty for forgetting." "That is not forgetting," Quinn said firmly. "That is healing. There is a difference." "Is there?" Marianne looked at him, and in the firelight her eyes seemed darker, more haunted. "Sometimes it feels like forgetting is a betrayal. Like if I let myself move forward, I am leaving him behind." "You could never leave him behind," Quinn said. "He is part of who you are, part of what made you the woman sitting here now. Moving forward does not mean erasing him from your life. It means carrying him with you into whatever comes next." Marianne was quiet for a long time, and when she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "You are a very patient man, Quinn Sutherland." It was the first time she had used his given name, and hearing it from her lips sent warmth through Quinn's chest that had nothing to do with the coffee or the fire. "I told you I would wait." "You did." Marianne met his eyes across the fire. "I am starting to believe you might actually mean it. I have never been more serious about anything in my life." Something shifted in the air between them, something subtle but undeniable. It was not love, not yet, but it was the first fragile tendril of possibility, the first acknowledgement that maybe, just maybe, Marianne's heart was not as dead as she had believed. The rest of the cattle drive passed without incident, and they reached the railhead in Reno on schedule. The sale went well, and Robert Sutherland was pleased with the prices they received. That evening, he insisted on treating everyone to dinner at a local restaurant, a rare luxury for ranch hands who usually ate beans and hardtack on the trail. Quinn found himself seated across from Marianne at the long table, and he noticed that she seemed more relaxed than he had ever seen her. There was color in her cheeks from the days spent outdoors, and she even laughed at one of the ranch hand's terrible jokes, a sound that made Quinn's heart skip a beat. After dinner, as the others headed to a nearby saloon, Quinn offered to walk Marianne back to the boarding house where the women were staying. She accepted with only a moment's hesitation, and they walked through the lamplit streets of Reno in comfortable silence. "Thank you for including me on the drive," Marianne said as they reached the boarding house steps. "I had forgotten how much I enjoy this work." "You are good at it," Quinn said simply. "Better than most men I know. My father would hire you permanently if you were willing." "I still have my own ranch to run." "I know, but the offer stands if you ever change your mind." Marianne studied him for a moment, her head tilted slightly to one side. "You really do not expect anything from me, do you? You meant what you said about waiting without pressure or expectations." "I did," Quinn confirmed. "Whatever happens between us or does not happen, I value your friendship. I value working with you. That is enough for me." "It should not be," Marianne said, and there was something almost sad in her voice. "You are a good man, Quinn. You deserve someone who can give you their whole heart, not just the pieces of one." "I will take whatever you are willing to give," Quinn said. "Pieces, whole, or nothing at all. The choice is yours, Marianne. It has always been yours." She looked at him for a long moment, and Quinn thought he saw something like longing flash across her face. Then she stood on her toes and pressed a quick, feather-light kiss to his cheek. "Good night, Quinn." Before he could respond, she had slipped into the boarding house, leaving him standing on the steps with his hand pressed to his cheek like a schoolboy after his first kiss. The return journey to Carson City felt both longer and shorter than the trip to Reno. Longer because Quinn found himself acutely aware of every moment spent near Marianne, every accidental brush of their hands or meeting of their eyes. Shorter because the easy camaraderie that had developed between them made the days pass quickly. By the time they arrived back at the Sutherland Ranch, autumn was in full swing. The cottonwoods along the creek had turned gold, and the air had a crisp bite that promised winter was not far behind. Quinn helped Marianne unsaddle her horse, and as she prepared to ride back to her own ranch, he found himself reluctant to let her go. "Will you still work for us through the winter?" he asked, trying to keep his voice casual. "If your father still wants my help, yes," Marianne said. She paused, then added, "I find I enjoy the company more than I expected to." Quinn's heart leaped, but he kept his expression neutral. "The company enjoys having you around as well." "Just the company?" Marianne asked, and there was a teasing note in her voice that Quinn had never heard before. He met her eyes steadily, especially one particular member of the company. Marianne's cheeks flushed slightly, but she did not look away. "You are impossible, you know that, so I have been told." Quinn allowed himself a grin. "Will I see you on Tuesday?" "Tuesday," Marianne confirmed, and as she rode away, Quinn could have sworn he saw her smile. The winter months brought their own challenges and rhythms. Marianne continued working at the Sutherland Ranch 3 days a week, and Quinn found reasons to visit her ranch on the days she was home. Sometimes he brought supplies she needed, sometimes he helped with repairs, and sometimes he just stopped by to share a cup of coffee and conversation. Slowly, gradually, Marianne began to open up. She told Quinn stories about her childhood in Sacramento, about how she had lost both her parents to cholera when she was 17 and had come to Nevada to start fresh. She talked about meeting Thomas, about how he had been the first person since her parents died who made her feel safe. And most importantly, she began to talk about her grief without it feeling like a wall between them. I used to think that if I let myself be happy again, it would mean Thomas died for nothing, Marianne admitted one snowy December afternoon. They were in the Sutherland barn, checking on a mare who was due to foal soon. Like his death only mattered if I spent the rest of my life mourning him. That is a heavy burden to carry, Quinn said gently, stroking the mare's neck. It is. Marianne leaned against the stall door, her expression thoughtful. But I have been thinking about what you said, about carrying him with me rather than burying myself alongside him. I think Thomas would have hated knowing that his death made me give up on living. I think you are right, Quinn agreed. From everything you have told me about him, he loved you too much to want that for you. Marianne smiled, a real smile that reached her eyes and transformed her whole face. He did love me, and I loved him. I always will in a way. I would never ask you to stop, Quinn said, and he meant it. Love does not die just because the person does. It changes maybe, but it does not disappear. No, Marianne agreed softly. It does not. She was quiet for a moment, then added, I think my heart might be starting to grow again. Just a little, just enough to notice. Quinn felt like all the air had been punched out of his lungs. He turned to face her fully, hardly daring to hope. Yeah. Marianne stepped closer, close enough that Quinn could see the gold flecks in her gray eyes. You were right to wait. I was not ready before. I am not sure I am completely ready now, but I think I could be with time. I have all the time in the world, Quinn said, his voice rough with emotion. You are still willing to wait, even after all these months. Marianne, I would wait years if that was what you needed. Quinn reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and took her hand in his. Her fingers were cold from the winter air, and he rubbed his thumb across her knuckles gently. You are worth waiting for. You have always been worth waiting for. Tears spilled down Marianne's cheeks, but for the first time since Quinn had known her, they seemed like healing tears rather than grieving ones. I am scared, she whispered. I am so scared of loving you and losing you. I know, Quinn said. I am scared too. Loving someone is always a risk, but I think you are braver than you give yourself credit for. Marianne laughed shakily. I do not feel very brave right now. Bravery is not the absence of fear, Quinn reminded her. It is doing the thing that scares you anyway. She looked up at him, her eyes searching his face as though looking for something. Whatever she found there must have satisfied her, because she leaned forward slowly and rested her forehead against his chest. Quinn wrapped his arms around her carefully, holding her like she was something precious and fragile that might break if he squeezed too hard. They stood like that for a long time, and Quinn felt Marianne's breathing gradually slow and even out. When she finally pulled back, she looked more at peace than he had ever seen her. I am not ready for anything dramatic, she said firmly. No grand declarations or immediate promises, but I would like to try if you are still willing. Try what? Quinn asked, though his heart already knew the answer. Try to let my heart grow again, Marianne said. Try to let myself care about someone new. Try to be brave enough to love again, even though it terrifies me. Quinn cupped her face gently in his hands, his thumbs brushing away the last of her tears. I am more than willing. We will go at whatever pace you need, no pressure, no rush. Just two people getting to know each other and seeing where it leads. That sounds good, Marianne said, and then, with a boldness that surprised them both, she stretched up and pressed her lips to his. The kiss was soft, tentative, and lasted only a few seconds before Marianne pulled back, her cheeks flushed. But it was enough. It was a beginning. Christmas that year was the happiest Quinn could remember since his mother died. His father invited Marianne to join them for Christmas dinner, and she accepted with only slight hesitation. Robert Sutherland seemed genuinely delighted to have her there, and Quinn suspected his father had been hoping for this development for months. Over roasted turkey and potatoes, Robert told stories about Quinn's mother, about how she had transformed the ranch from a struggling operation into a thriving one through sheer determination and cleverness. Marianne listened with rapt attention, asking questions and sharing her own stories about Thomas in return. Quinn watched the two of them and felt a contentment settle into his bones. This was what healing looked like, he realized. Not forgetting the ones you had lost, but making space for new people and new memories while still honoring the past. After dinner, Quinn and Marianne bundled up in coats and walked out to look at the stars. The night was cold and clear, and the sky was a black velvet blanket studded with diamonds. "This was a good day," Marianne said softly, her breath forming small clouds in the cold air. "It was," Quinn agreed. He held out his hand, and after a moment Marianne took it. Even through their gloves he could feel the warmth of her touch. "Thank you for waiting for me," Marianne said. "I know it could not have been easy." "You are wrong about that," Quinn said. "Waiting for you has been the easiest decision I ever made. Knowing you, getting to see you come back to life little by little, that has been a privilege." Marianne leaned against his shoulder, and they stood together in the quiet winter night, watching their breath mist in the cold air. "I cannot promise I will not have bad days," she said eventually. "Days when the grief comes back hard and I need to be alone with it. Days when I need to go to Thomas's grave and talk to him. Days when I cannot give you everything you might want from me." "I know," Quinn said, "and that is fine. Healing is not a straight line, and I do not expect you to be perfect." "What do you expect?" Marianne asked curiously. Quinn thought about it for a moment. "Honesty. If you are having a bad day, tell me. If you need space, tell me. If something I do hurts you or reminds you of Thomas in a painful way, tell me. I can handle your grief, Marianne. What I cannot handle is you pretending it does not exist just to make me happy." Marianne pulled back slightly to look up at him, and there was wonder in her expression. "How are you so patient, so understanding? Most men would have given up on me months ago." "I am not most men," Quinn said simply. "And you are not most women. We are who we are, and I happen to think we fit together rather well." "We do," Marianne agreed softly. Then, with a small smile, she added, "Though I should warn you, Thomas always said I was stubborn as a mule and twice as difficult when I got an idea in my head." Quinn laughed, the sound carrying across the quiet ranch. "Funny, my father says the same thing about me." "I guess that means we are well matched." "I guess so," Marianne said, and she was definitely smiling now, a real, genuine smile that made her whole face light up. The winter months passed in a blur of ranch work and stolen moments together. Quinn and Marianne continued their professional relationship at the Sutherland Ranch. But now, it was layered with a personal connection that grew stronger with each passing week. They ate lunch together, rode out to check on cattle together, and spent evenings talking by the fire about everything and nothing. In February, Quinn worked up the courage to kiss Marianne properly. Not the tentative press of lips they had shared in the barn, but a real kiss full of all the feelings he had been holding back for months. She kissed him back with an intensity that surprised them both, her hands fisting in his shirt as though afraid he might disappear. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Marianne pressed her forehead to his and whispered, "I am falling in love with you." "I did not think it was possible, but I am." Quinn's heart felt like it might burst out of his chest. "I fell in love with you the day you told me your heart was buried," he admitted. I just had to wait for you to catch up." Marianne laughed, the sound bright and clear, and kissed him again. By the time spring arrived, bringing with it the renewal of green grass and wildflowers across the Nevada hills, Marianne had become a permanent fixture in Quinn's life. She still worked at the Sutherland Ranch 3 days a week, but now she often stayed for dinner afterward, and Quinn spent most of his free time at her ranch, helping her with the endless work of maintaining the property. One warm evening in April, as they sat on the porch of the Calloway Ranch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink, Marianne said, "I went to Thomas's grave yesterday." Quinn tensed slightly, though he tried not to show it. Marianne noticed anyway and took his hand, squeezing reassuringly. "It is okay," she said. "I wanted to tell you about it." "All right," Quinn said carefully. "I told him about you," Marianne continued, her voice soft but steady. "I told him that I met someone who makes me want to live again, who waited patiently while my heart grew back, who loves me even though I am broken and scarred and probably always will be in some ways." She turned to look at Quinn, and there were tears in her eyes, but they were happy tears. "And I told him that I think he would have liked you, that I think he would be glad I found someone to take care of me the way he used to." Quinn felt his own eyes stinging with tears. "What do you think he would say?" "I think he would say that life is for the living, and I should not waste mine clinging to the past." Marianne smiled through her tears. "I think he would tell me to love you with everything I have, and to be brave enough to be happy again." "Is that what you want?" Quinn asked, hardly daring to breathe. "To be happy with me?" "Yes," Marianne said firmly. "That is exactly what I want." Quinn pulled her close, holding her tight, and felt the last of the walls between them crumble away. She was not completely healed, he knew that. The scars of losing Thomas would probably always be there, just like the scars from losing his mother were still there. But scars were proof that you had survived something terrible, and they did not have to define your whole life. In June, Quinn asked Marianne to marry him. He did it without fanfare, on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon while they were mending fence on her property. He simply turned to her and said, "Marianne Calloway, I love you more than I thought it was possible to love anyone. Would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" Marianne stared at him for a long moment, her eyes wide with surprise. Then she laughed, that bright, clear laugh he had come to love, and said, "Yes, yes, of course I will marry you." Quinn pulled a simple gold band from his pocket, a ring that had belonged to his mother, and slipped it onto Marianne's finger. It fit perfectly, as though it had been made for her. "I know this is fast," Quinn said. "We have only been courting for 6 months. If you want to wait longer, I understand." "No," Marianne said, shaking her head firmly. "I spent enough time waiting, enough time being afraid. I love you, Quinn Sutherland, and I want to marry you as soon as possible." They were married in August of 1878, almost exactly a year after Marianne had told Quinn her heart was buried, and he had promised to wait until it grew again. The wedding was small but joyful, held at the Sutherland Ranch with just close friends and neighbors in attendance. Robert Sutherland stood as Quinn's best man, and one of the neighboring ranch women stood up for Marianne. As they exchanged vows in front of the gathered witnesses, Quinn looked into Marianne's eyes and saw no shadows there, only love and hope and a future full of possibilities. She wore a simple cream-colored dress and had wildflowers woven into her hair, and Quinn thought she was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Quinn kissed her thoroughly, to the whooping approval of the assembled guests, and Marianne kissed him back with no hesitation, no fear, just pure joy. The first year of their marriage was an adjustment for both of them. Marianne moved into the Sutherland ranch house, though she insisted on keeping her own ranch running with the help of hired hands. Quinn supported this completely, understanding that the ranch Thomas had built was important to her, a tangible connection to the life she had lived before. They had disagreements, of course. Marianne was stubborn and independent, not always comfortable asking for help or admitting when she was overwhelmed. Quinn could be overprotective, struggling to give her space when she needed it. But they talked through their conflicts, learned each other's boundaries and needs, and grew stronger together through the process. In the spring of 1879, Marianne discovered she was pregnant. The news filled her with a complicated mix of joy and terror. She confided in Quinn one night that she was afraid something would go wrong, that she would lose this baby the way she had lost Thomas, that happiness was too fragile to trust. Quinn held her close and said, "Fear is natural, but we cannot let it steal our joy. This baby is a blessing, Marianne. Whatever happens, we will face it together." "Together," Marianne repeated, and the words seemed to calm her. Their son was born in November, healthy and strong, with his mother's gray eyes and his father's dark hair. They named him Thomas Quinn Sutherland, honoring both the past and the present. Marianne cried when she first held him, tears of joy mixed with grief for the man who would never meet this child. "I wish Thomas could see him," she whispered to Quinn as they sat together in their bedroom, the baby sleeping peacefully in her arms. "He can," Quinn said softly. "Wherever he is, I am sure he can see his namesake and know that part of him lives on." Marianne looked up at Quinn with love shining in her eyes. "Thank you," she said, "for understanding, for never being jealous of my love for Thomas, for being secure enough to let me honor him." "Thomas was part of making you who you are," Quinn said. "I could never resent him for that, and I am honored that you trusted me with his name." As the years passed, the Sutherland Ranch prospered under the combined efforts of Quinn, Marianne, and Robert. They expanded their cattle operation, added breeding horses to their business, and became one of the most successful ranches in the Carson City area. Marianne continued to manage the Calloway Ranch as well, eventually turning it into a specialized operation that bred high-quality cattle for sale to other ranchers. In 1881, Marianne gave birth to their second child, a daughter they named Sarah Rose. 2 years later came another son, Michael, and in 1885, their youngest daughter, Elizabeth, was born. The ranch house was full of noise and laughter, a stark contrast to the silent grief that had filled Marianne's life 7 years earlier. Robert Sutherland adored his grandchildren and spent his later years teaching them everything he knew about ranching. He passed away peacefully in his sleep in 1887, and Quinn grieved deeply for the father who had been his rock through so many difficult times. But he had Marianne by his side through the grief, just as she had him, and together they weathered the loss. As their children grew, Quinn and Marianne made sure to tell them about both of their grandfathers. Young Thomas learned about the man he was named for, about how Thomas Calloway had loved his wife deeply and built a ranch with his own hands. The younger children heard stories about Robert Sutherland, who had taught their father everything about running a ranch and had been wise enough to hire their mother when other men would have dismissed her skills. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Quinn took Marianne back to the spot where he had first told her he would wait for her heart to grow again. They stood in the same cattle pen, now repaired and freshly painted, and looked back at all they had built together. "Do you remember what you said to me that day?" Marianne asked, leaning against her husband's side. "I told you I would wait until your heart grew again," Quinn said, wrapping his arm around her shoulders. "And you did," Marianne said softly. "You waited patiently while I healed, while I learned to be brave enough to love again. I do not think I ever properly thanked you for that." "You thank me every day," Quinn said, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. Every smile, every laugh, every moment of joy we share together is all the thanks I need. Marianne turned in his arms to face him fully. My heart did not just grow again, Quinn. It grew bigger than it was before. Big enough to hold love for Thomas, love for you, love for our children, love for this life we have built together. I did not think that was possible, but you showed me it was. We showed each other, Quinn corrected gently. You taught me that patience is not passive waiting but active love. You taught me that grief and joy can coexist, that honoring the past does not mean being trapped by it. You made me a better man, Marianne. And you made me believe in second chances, Marianne said, tears gathering in her eyes. You made me believe that hearts can grow again after they have been buried, that life can be beautiful even after loss, that love is always worth the risk. They kissed then, a kiss that held 10 years of partnership, of struggles overcome and joys shared, of a love that had been worth waiting for. The years continued to pass in the comfortable rhythm of ranch life. Their children grew into capable young adults, each of them inheriting their parents' work ethic and love for the land. Thomas, the eldest, took over management of the Calloway Ranch when he turned 21, honoring the legacy of the man whose name he carried. Sarah Rose showed a talent for horse training that rivaled her mother's skill with cattle. Michael was interested in the business side of ranching and helped expand their operation into new markets. Elizabeth, the youngest, loved working with her hands and became skilled at everything from blacksmithing to carpentry. Quinn and Marianne grew older together, their love deepening with each passing season. They still worked the ranch side by side, though they left more of the hard physical labor to their children and the ranch hands as the years took their toll. Quinn's hair turned gray, and lines appeared around Marianne's eyes, but to each other, they were as beautiful as they had been on their wedding day. In 1895, on a warm summer evening not unlike the one where they had first met 18 years earlier, Quinn and Marianne sat together on the porch of their ranch house, watching the sun set over the Nevada hills. Their grandchildren, Thomas's 3 children and Sarah Rose's 2, were playing in the yard under the watchful eyes of their parents. "Can you believe we have been married 17 years?" Marianne asked, her hand clasped in Quinn's. "Sometimes it feels like yesterday," Quinn said. "Other times, I cannot remember what my life was like before you." "I can," Marianne said quietly. "I remember the darkness, the grief that felt like it would swallow me whole. I remember thinking I would never feel anything good again, that my heart was dead and buried alongside Thomas." She squeezed Quinn's hand. "And then you came along and told me you would wait, that you would wait as long as it took for my heart to grow again." "I would do it again in a heartbeat," Quinn said. "Every moment of waiting, every moment of patience was worth it for the life we have built together." "We have been blessed," Marianne agreed. 4 wonderful children, 5 beautiful grandchildren, and a ranch that thrives beyond anything I could have imagined. "And each other," Quinn added. "That is the greatest blessing of all." As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and gold, their eldest grandson came running up to the porch. "Grandpa Quinn, Grandma Marianne, come play with us," he called out, his eyes bright with excitement. Quinn and Marianne exchanged a glance, then laughed and rose from their chairs. They were getting older, but they were not too old to play with their grandchildren. They walked down into the yard together, hand in hand, surrounded by the family they had built and the love they had fought for. That night, as they lay in bed together, Marianne turned to Quinn and said, "I need you to know something." "What is it?" Quinn asked, pulling her close. "I need you to know that loving you has been the greatest adventure of my life," Marianne said, "greater than anything I could have imagined." "You were right, all those years ago, my heart did grow again. It grew strong and full and capable of more love than I thought possible." She placed her hand over his heart, feeling the steady beat beneath her palm. "Thank you for waiting for me. Thank you for showing me that life after loss is not just possible, but can be beautiful." Quinn covered her hand with his own, emotion thick in his throat. "Thank you for being brave enough to try again. Thank you for letting me love you, for building this life with me, for giving me a family and a future I never dreamed I could have." They fell asleep that night as they had every night for 17 years, wrapped in each other's arms, two hearts that had found each other against all odds and had grown together into something stronger than either could have been alone. The autumn of 1895 brought an unexpected challenge when a severe drought struck Nevada. Water became scarce, and many ranchers in the area faced the possibility of losing their herds. But the Sutherlands had planned for such emergencies, thanks to Marianne's foresight. Years earlier, she had insisted they dig several deep wells across their property and create a system of water storage that could sustain them through difficult times. As neighboring ranches struggled, the Sutherlands opened their wells to others, sharing their water with those in need. It was a decision that cost them money in the short term, but earned them respect and goodwill throughout the territory. Marianne organized a community effort to help smaller ranchers survive the drought, and Quinn worked alongside her, proving that their partnership extended beyond their own ranch to the broader community. By the time the rains finally came in the spring of 1896, the Sutherland name was synonymous with generosity and leadership in Carson City. Their children had all played roles in the drought relief effort, and Quinn and Marianne were proud to see the values they had instilled in them being put into action. "This is what it is all about," Marianne said one evening as they surveyed their land, green once again after the winter rains. "Not just building something for ourselves, but creating something that benefits everyone around us, making our community stronger. Thomas would be proud of you," Quinn said, "of the woman you have become, of everything you have accomplished." Marianne smiled, and there was no pain in her expression when she thought of her first husband, only gratitude. "I like to think he would be. I like to think he is somewhere watching over all of us, pleased with how things turned out." "I am certain of it," Quinn said. He pulled her close, and they stood together in the fading light, two people who had found each other when both needed it most, and had built something lasting and beautiful from the ashes of loss. As the new century approached, Quinn and Marianne began to think about the legacy they would leave behind. They had built a successful ranch, raised 4 children who were all thriving in their own ways, and had established themselves as pillars of their community. But more than that, they had proven that love could triumph over loss, that hearts could heal even when they seemed broken beyond repair, that patience and faith could transform grief into joy. Their story became something of a legend in Carson City. Young couples would point to them as an example of what true partnership looked like. Widows and widowers took hope from Marianne's journey from despair to happiness. And anyone who felt their heart was too broken to love again was reminded of the cowboy who had promised to wait until that heart grew again, and the woman who had been brave enough to let it happen. In the summer of 1900, they celebrated their 22nd wedding anniversary with a large party at the ranch. All of their children and grandchildren were there, along with friends and neighbors from across the territory. As Quinn made a toast to his wife, he looked around at the assembled crowd and felt a profound sense of gratitude. 22 years ago, he said, his voice carrying across the gathered assembly, I met a woman who told me her heart was buried. She had suffered a terrible loss and believed she would never love again. But I saw something in her, a strength and a beauty that went beyond her grief, and I told her I would wait. I would wait as long as it took for her heart to grow again. He turned to Marianne, his eyes shining with love. I did not have to wait as long as I feared, because this remarkable woman, my wife, was braver than she knew. She took a chance on love again, on life again, on happiness again. And in doing so, she gave me the greatest gift I could ever receive. Marianne stood and crossed to her husband, taking his hand in hers. "And you gave me a gift just as great," she said, her voice steady and clear. "You gave me permission to heal. You showed me that grieving one love did not mean I could not embrace another. You taught me that the human heart is not a finite thing, that it can expand to hold more love than we ever thought possible." She looked out at their children and grandchildren, at the friends who had supported them through the years, at the ranch that represented everything they had built together. "This is what happens when you are patient," she said. "This is what grows when you tend to something with care and love and faith. Not just a heart, but a whole life, a whole family, a whole future full of possibilities." The party continued late into the night, filled with music and dancing and laughter. Quinn and Marianne danced together under the stars, moving slowly to a fiddle tune played by one of their ranch hands. They held each other close, remembering the long journey that had brought them to this moment, grateful for every step of the way. "I love you," Marianne whispered against Quinn's shoulder, "more than words can say." "I love you too," Quinn replied. "Today, tomorrow, and every day after that." As they grew older, Quinn and Marianne gradually handed over more of the ranch operations to their children. Thomas ran the Calloway Ranch with skill and dedication, honoring the legacy of both the man he was named for and the parents who had raised him. Sarah Rose and her husband managed the horse breeding operation. Michael handled the business and financial aspects. Elizabeth, who had married a skilled carpenter, oversaw all maintenance and improvements to the ranch buildings. By 1905, Quinn and Marianne were in their 50s and content to let their children take the lead while they served as advisors and spent more time with their growing number of grandchildren. They had 8 grandchildren now, ranging in age from 15 down to 3, and each one was precious to them. On quiet evenings, they would sit on their porch and watch the sun set over land they had worked and loved for decades. They would talk about their day, share stories from the past, and make plans for the future. Sometimes they would sit in comfortable silence, simply enjoying each other's presence. "You ever regret it?" Marianne asked one evening. "Waiting for me, I mean." "You could have married someone else, someone who was not broken by grief, someone who could have given you their whole heart from the beginning." Quinn turned to look at her, surprised by the question. "Regret it? Marianne, waiting for you was the best decision I ever made. You were worth every moment of patience, every moment of uncertainty. You are worth everything." "Even now?" Marianne asked softly. "Now that we are getting old, now that my hair is gray and my hands are rough from years of work, especially now," Quinn said firmly. He took her weathered hands in his and brought them to his lips. "These hands have built a life, raised children, and cared for animals and people with equal gentleness. This face shows the marks of years spent laughing and living and loving. You are more beautiful to me now than you were at 24. Marianne's eyes filled with tears, and she leaned over to kiss him. "How did I get so lucky?" she murmured. "To have loved 2 good men in one lifetime. The luck was all mine," Quinn replied. "I got to love the woman Thomas loved, the woman he helped shape and support. In a way, I owe him a debt of gratitude for taking care of you until I could." It was a generous thing to say, and typical of Quinn. He had never been threatened by Marianne's love for her first husband, had always understood that her heart was big enough to hold both past and present. It was one of the many reasons she loved him so deeply. In 1908, they celebrated their 30th wedding anniversary. It was a smaller affair than their 22nd, just family and close friends, but it was no less joyful. Their children presented them with a beautiful carved bench that had been made by Elizabeth and her husband, with brass plates indicating it was a gift from the Sutherland family. "For all the evenings you have spent watching sunsets together," Thomas Jr. said as they unveiled the bench. "May you have many more years of them." Quinn and Marianne sat on the bench together that very evening, and it became their favorite spot. They would sit there most nights when weather permitted, watching the sun paint the Nevada sky in brilliant colors, holding hands and reflecting on the life they had built. 30 years, Marianne marveled. 30 years since I said yes to your proposal. Sometimes it feels like a lifetime, and sometimes it feels like no time at all. That is how I feel too, Quinn agreed. The years have passed so quickly, and yet we have lived so much in that time. You remember that first day you came to my ranch? Marianne asked. When your father sent you to offer me the job. I remember everything about that day, Quinn said. I remember thinking you were the most beautiful woman I had ever seen, even with grief written all over your face. I remember the way you stood so straight and proud, refusing to let anyone see how much you were hurting. I was hurting so much, Marianne admitted. I did not think I would ever feel whole again. But you did, Quinn reminded her. You let your heart grow again, just like I knew it would. Because you waited, Marianne said. Because you showed me that it was safe to try, that you would not push me or demand more than I could give. You gave me time and space to heal, and that made all the difference. Quinn pulled her closer, and she rested her head on his shoulder. I would wait 100 years if that was what you needed, he said. You are worth any amount of patience. They sat in comfortable silence as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of purple and pink. Around them, their ranch bustled with the evening activities, their children and grandchildren going about their tasks, the livestock settling for the night. It was a good life, a full life, and they were grateful for every moment of it. The years after 1910 brought the usual mix of joys and sorrows. They celebrated births and mourned deaths, weathered economic downturns and celebrated good years. Through it all, Quinn and Marianne remained each other's constant support, their love deepening with each passing year. In 1915, they became great-grandparents when Thomas Jr.'s eldest daughter had her first child. Holding that tiny baby in her arms, Marianne felt the full circle of life in a way she never had before. She thought about Thomas Calloway, about how he had wanted children but died before they could have them. She thought about the woman she had been when he died, certain her life was over at 24. And she marveled at how wrong she had been, at how much life and love and joy had come after that dark period. "What are you thinking about?" Quinn asked, watching his wife cradle their great-grandson. "I am thinking about how grateful I am," Marianne said softly, "for all of it. For Thomas, who taught me how to love deeply. For you, who taught me how to love again. For our children and grandchildren, and now this precious boy. For every moment of joy and even the moments of sorrow, because they all led to this." Quinn sat beside her and put his arm around her shoulders, both of them looking down at the sleeping baby. "We have been blessed," he agreed, "more than I ever dreamed possible." As they moved into their 60s and then their 70s, Quinn and Marianne slowed down physically, but remained sharp mentally and emotionally. They spent more time telling stories to their grandchildren and great-grandchildren, passing down the history of the ranch and the family. They made sure the younger generations knew about both Thomas Calloway and Robert Sutherland, about the foundations upon which the family's success had been built. On their 50th wedding anniversary, In 1928, the entire family gathered for a massive celebration. There were now 4 generations of Sutherlands present, from Quinn and Marianne down to several great-great-grandchildren. The youngest, a girl of 3, climbed into Marianne's lap during dinner and asked, "Grandma Marianne, why do you and Grandpa Quinn always hold hands?" Marianne smiled and glanced at Quinn, who was indeed holding her free hand under the table. "Because your Grandpa Quinn waited for me when I needed him to," she said. "And I never want to let go." "Waited for what?" the little girl asked with the innocent curiosity of childhood. "Waited for my heart to grow again," Marianne explained gently. "A long time ago, before I met Grandpa Quinn, I was very sad. I thought I would never be happy again. But Grandpa Quinn was very patient and he waited until I was ready to be happy. And now we have been happy together for 50 years. The little girl seemed satisfied with this answer and scampered off to play with her cousins. Quinn squeezed Marianne's hand and said, "That was a good explanation." "It was the truth," Marianne said simply. "Everything good in my life came from your willingness to wait, to be patient, to believe in me when I did not believe in myself. And everything good in my life came from your bravery in trying again," Quinn countered. "We were good for each other, Marianne. We still are." As the party continued around them, with music and dancing and multiple generations celebrating together, Quinn and Marianne slipped away to their favorite bench. They sat together in the gathering dusk, watching the familiar landscape they had known for so many years. 50 years, Quinn marveled. Half a century together. "The best years of my life," Marianne said. "Well, tied with the years I had with Thomas, but different, both precious, both important." "I am glad you can say that," Quinn said. "I never wanted you to feel like you had to choose between your love for him and your love for me." "I never had to choose," Marianne assured him. "That is the beautiful thing about hearts that grow again. They do not replace what was lost, they expand to hold more." They sat together until the stars came out, talking and reminiscing, grateful for every moment they had been given. Inside the ranch house, their family celebrated, the sound of laughter and music drifting out across the Nevada night. It was a good sound, the sound of a legacy well built, of love that had multiplied across generations. Quinn and Marianne lived into their 80s, remarkable for their era and a testament to their strong constitutions and the good life they had built. They remained on the ranch they loved, surrounded by family, active and engaged until near the very end. Quinn passed away peacefully in his sleep in 1933, at the age of 82, with Marianne beside him as she had been for 55 years. His last words to her were, "Thank you for letting me wait for you. It was worth every moment." Marianne lived for 2 more years after Quinn's death, and though she grieved deeply, she did not fall into the same dark pit that had claimed her after Thomas died. She had learned, through Quinn's patience and love, that grief and joy could coexist, that losing someone did not mean your life was over. She spent her remaining years surrounded by her children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, and great-great-grandchildren, telling stories about both the men she had loved and ensuring their memories would live on. When Marianne passed away in 1935 at the age of 82, she was buried between Thomas Calloway and Quinn Sutherland, the 2 men who had shaped her life and taught her different lessons about love. Her family placed a single stone that connected all 3 graves with an inscription that read, "Here lies Marianne, beloved wife of Thomas Calloway and Quinn Sutherland. She taught us that hearts can grow again, and that love is always worth the wait." The Sutherland Ranch continued to thrive under the management of their descendants, a living testament to everything Quinn and Marianne had built together. And in Carson City, Nevada, Their story was passed down through generations as a reminder that even when your heart feels buried, even when grief seems insurmountable, there can be growth and renewal and love again. All it takes is patience, bravery, and someone willing to wait until your heart grows again.